Most of us live in the America you see on TV, the one with paved roads, reliable 911 dispatchers, and drinkable water. But there is another version of this country, a version that looks less like a global superpower and more like a failed state. We call them the worst towns in the United States. These are places so desperate for life that they will sell you a house for the price of a smartphone just to get you on the tax rolls. We like to pretend these ghost towns are just resting, that they are just one factory opening away from a comeback. But that is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep better. The truth is much darker. Parts of the richest nation on earth have been quietly abandoned. These are not war zones with soldiers. The war here is silent and the enemy is neglect. But daily life here looks less like the American dream and more like a collective surrender. And here is the thing you need to understand before we start. In America, cheap is never actually free. When Zillow shows you a mansion for $16,000, you are not seeing a deal. You are seeing a warning sign. You are seeing a trap. That price tag is not for the wood and the brick. That is the price you pay for isolation. It is the price you pay for having no police when you call for help. It is the price for drinking water that might poison your family. These towns are not selling real estate. They are selling the exit strategy of the people who fled. And they are hoping you are foolish enough to be the one holding the bag. Today we are touring 10 of these forgotten places. It's 10 towns where the American dream didn't just fade, it collapsed. Let's take a look. Number 10, Pritchard, Alabama. Pritchard does not punch you in the face when you first arrive. That is why it sits at number 10 on this list. It eases you into the decline. You assume it is just a struggling edge of mobile. You think it is something that will smooth out if you just drive a few more miles. Then you realize it does not get better. This is a city that collapsed administratively long before it collapsed physically. Years of financial mismanagement drained the city to the bone. It got so bad that basic services stopped being reliable. At one point, Pritchard literally ran out of money to operate the city. That is not a figure of speech. The city experienced a pension crisis that should terrify every public worker in America. Wow, imagine working your entire life for a city. You punch the clock every day for 30 years. You expect that check to be there when you retire. And then one day, the fund is empty. The city simply stopped paying over 150 retirees. When residents stop trusting a city to honor its basic promises, everything changes. People stop reporting potholes. They stop fixing their fences. They stop believing that next year will be better than this year. That is when the decline becomes permanent. Pritchard has filed for municipal bankruptcy more than once. It is a chronic condition here. To understand the scale, look at the poverty rate. The national average poverty rate in the US is around 11.5%. In Pritchard, that number skyrockets to over 30%. And that is nearly triple the national average. But the numbers do not tell the whole story. The story is in the water infrastructure that loses more water than it delivers. It is in the feeling of being completely unsupported by the state. Living here does not feel like living in a community. It feels like you are on your own in a place that has forgotten you exist. The house might be cheap, but the cost of living without a functioning government is higher than you can imagine. Number 9, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Clarksdale survives on its reputation, and honestly, that reputation almost hurts it more than it helps it. The legacy of the blues keeps the town on the map. Tourists still come here to see the crossroads. They come to breathe in that musical history, but history does not keep the streetlights on. Tourism comes and goes. It happens mostly on weekends. It happens mostly downtown. The rest of the city exists in a completely different economic reality. This is what happens when a town relies on a single engine that stops running. When farming mechanized, the jobs left. When manufacturing moved overseas, the backup plan disappeared. Nothing replaced them at that scale. Young people did exactly what you would expect them to do. They packed their bags and left. Those who stayed just aged in place along with the buildings. Infrastructure followed the same path of slow decay. Clarksdale is not chaotic like some other places we will discuss. It is just tired. Everything works just well enough to avoid a state of emergency, but nothing works well enough to inspire any confidence in the future. Since 1980, Clarksdale has lost 1/3 of its population. Think about that for a second. 1 out of every 3 people just vanished from the tax rolls. Let's talk about income. The median household income in the United States is around $75,000. In Clarksdale, it is under $30,000. That is a $45,000 gap between here and the rest of the country. When your average income is less than half the national average, your tax base is non-existent. A weak tax base means broken roads. It means schools that cannot afford books. It means a police force that cannot afford gas. If you look at the health and safety grades for this town, they are failing. The only thing that gets an A grade is the cost of living, and that is the classic trap. When everything else is broken, the houses are cheap. But you have to ask yourself what you are actually buying. Are you buying a home, or are you buying a front row seat to a slow motion funeral? Number 8, Natchez, Mississippi. Natchez is a magic trick. It shows you one side and prays you do not turn your head to look at the other. The riverfront is polished and beautiful. The antebellum mansions are maintained with absolute precision. Tourists come here and leave thinking the place is stable, but step 3 blocks off the scenic route. That illusion collapses faster than you can blink. The economy never diversified after the river trade declined. Tourism money circulates in a very small, closed loop. It rarely reaches the hands of the actual residents living a few streets away. That creates a split city. It is a place where extreme beauty and extreme poverty sit uncomfortably close together. Natchez did not decline loudly. It preserved the past while letting the present rot away. Let me give you a concrete example of how bad the disparity is. The national poverty rate sits at roughly 11.5%. In Mississippi, the state average is already high at 19%, but in Natchez, it is 35.6%. That means more than 1 in every 3 people you pass on the street is living in poverty. The median household income here is $26,000. That is almost $50,000 less than the typical American household. There is a sharp income inequality by neighborhood that you can see with your own eyes. There is limited job growth outside of hospitality. But if you are not serving drinks or making beds for tourists, there is not much for you here. The crime rates reflect that desperation. Your chance of becoming a victim of a property crime is alarmingly high. Violent crime is also a persistent shadow over the locals. This is what decline looks like when it is wearing makeup. It puts on a pretty face for the visitors, but when the guests leave, the mask comes off, and underneath, the city is struggling to breathe. Buying a home here means picking a side. You are either in the bubble or you are in the struggle, and the bubble is getting smaller every single year. Number 7, Marksville, Louisiana. Marksville has a different kind of enemy. Its enemy is isolation. When regional hospitals consolidated and employers centralized in bigger cities, towns like this lost their lifelines. Healthcare became harder to access. Jobs disappeared quietly without making the evening news. The town never had the size or the leverage to recover from those hits. Once small towns like this lose their anchor institutions, everything becomes fragile. One business closure feels catastrophic. One construction delay becomes permanent. Marksville does not really feel dangerous in the way a big city ghetto does. It just feels forgotten. It feels like relevance packed up and moved 2 hours away. One of the biggest problems they face is limited local healthcare access. That is a massive problem if you plan to retire here. You are far away from everything. If you have a heart attack, the ambulance ride alone might be what kills you. They have a high dependence on public assistance. It feels like everyone here is surviving on some form of government welfare. There are few employers outside of government jobs and retail. It is a blueprint for what happens when towns survive but stop mattering to the wider economy. In 2026, we are seeing deeper poverty statistics here than ever before. The deep poverty rate, which measures people living on less than half the poverty line, is spiking. Currently, Louisiana has about 18% poverty, but in Marksville, that number pushes well past 25%. This is the kind of poverty where you cannot afford to fix a broken window, so you board it up, and then the next window breaks, and soon the whole block looks like a war zone. Living here means accepting that help is not coming. It means accepting that you are on an island. And the water is rising a little bit every single day. Cheap real estate is not an asset here. It is an anchor that keeps you trapped in a place the world has moved on from. Number 6, Ecorse, Michigan. Ecorse is a brutal lesson in industrial dependency. The name sounds like something mechanical, and that fits its history. Steel paid for everything in Ecorse for a long time. When the steel industry left, the tax base did not just dip, it collapsed. It happened so fast, the city never had a chance to adjust. Environmental contamination played a huge role in sealing its fate. The economic decline was compounded by the fact that the land itself was poisoned. This made redevelopment expensive and unattractive to anyone with money. They claimed bankruptcy in the 80s, but the pain did not stop there. Being near Detroit did not help this place. It just made the neglect more obvious by comparison. This is one of those Rust Belt towns that got hit the hardest when the industry crumbled. They have been losing population consistently since the 1970 census. 3 of the last 5 decades saw double-digit population losses. Now, because of the heavy industries that were there and are now gone, they are left with brownfields. These are territories of land that cannot be easily developed because of toxicity. This hurts the city immensely because they have a lot of this land. We are talking about petroleum, lead, arsenic, and asbestos. This limits what you can put on that land. Not a lot of people want to build a daycare or a grocery store on top of toxic waste. Of course, has its fair share of misery. This town has a lot of boarded up windows. Buildings have been vacant for years. Streets and sidewalks look like the last time they got any attention was 40 years ago. And in 2025, reports surfaced that the city was facing another cash crunch. They were days away from literally running out of money to pay the bills. They have a small riverfront which should be an asset, but most of the land that is riverfront is taken up by a train shipyard that looks toxic as hell. It is too bad. It is a place where you can physically see the scars of the American industrial collapse. Walking here feels like walking through a graveyard of the 20th century. Number 5. Cairo, Georgia. Cairo, Georgia surprises people. It is really not known to most Americans unless you are into motocross. And this is probably the most famous town for amateur motocross in the United States. But Cairo is a bit of a strange case. They have a nicer downtown for a town that does not look like it is doing well. So at first glance, it does not look that bad. But when you get into the neighborhoods, the illusion breaks. You find some homes that look like they belong in a third world country, and there are quite a few of them. While looking at this town, you almost feel guilty. You start thinking that putting these houses on display is wrong because these people are already in a bad situation. But we have to look at the reality. There are a lot of neighborhoods in and around this town that are falling apart. Their statistics are horrible too. Their schools get a failing grade. Their health and safety scores are failing. Their poverty rate is pushing 25%. Remember, the national average is 11.5%. Cairo is more than double that. The income per capita is around $19,000 a year. Think about that math. The average person in the United States makes at least $35,000 to $40,000 a year individually. Cairo is lagging behind by nearly 50%, but in Cairo, you expect southern modesty. You expect a slower pace. Maybe you expect limited opportunity. What you do not expect is how deep the poverty runs and how little momentum exists. Like so many other communities that relied on farming, modernization killed the jobs. Automation and mechanization made human labor less necessary. While inflation kept moving forward, the town stood still. Healthcare access here is thin. Retail options are limited to the bare minimum. Young adults leave early and they do not come back. Crime has also been creeping up. Reports in 2025 showed a spike in drug-related offenses in the region. It is the hidden rot beneath the quiet rural surface. It is a place where you can buy a house for nothing, but you will pay for it with your future. Number 4. Jennings, Louisiana. Jennings failed to diversify when it had the time. Oil, agriculture, and manufacturing once carried this town on their shoulders. When those industries declined, there were no backup plans. Infrastructure costs stayed exactly the same, but the revenue to pay for them vanished. The town shifted into what we call maintenance mode. They spend just enough to function, but never enough to improve. If you watch videos around here or you live in Louisiana, you know the situation. Pretty much the whole state is in bad shape when it comes to infrastructure, but Jennings has a specific problem with violence. It has a violent crime rate that is almost 200% above the national average. That is double the risk of anywhere else in the country. That is a terrifying statistic for a small town. Almost 24% of the population lives below the poverty line. Again, that is double the national standard. The income per capita is around $24,000. It is doing better than some others on this list, but not by much. Another problem they have is healthcare. They do not have the best access in the country. Actually, their access is pretty terrible. A lot of that has to do with a shrinking population. The last time Jennings saw real growth was in the 1950s. They have been losing people for around 75 years. When you lose people for that long, the empty spaces start to define the town. Empty houses attract crime, empty storefronts kill morale, and violence fills the vacuum left by opportunity. Buying a home under $100,000 here is easy. There are plenty to choose from, but you have to ask yourself why they are so cheap. You are not just buying a roof and 4 walls. You are buying into into a neighborhood where safety is not guaranteed. You are buying into a place where the police are overwhelmed. It is a high-stakes gamble with your physical safety, and the house prices reflect that risk. Number 3. Tallulah, Louisiana. Tallulah feels structurally overwhelmed. High poverty intersects with weak infrastructure and limited services to create a perfect storm. When something breaks here, there is rarely money to fix it quickly. Sometimes there is no money to fix it at all. Farming and rail once anchored this town. When they faded, the decline accelerated into a free fall. No diversification meant no recovery cycle. It was just failure following failure. This town has an odd amount of abandoned homes. They have been abandoned so long it looks like the earth is taking them back over. Vines are crushing the porches. Roofs are caving in under the weight of neglect. The people around here have had to adapt to a harsh reality. There are reports of rural gang activity. There is a sense of lawlessness that pervades the streets. I am not surprised a lot of crazy stuff goes on around here. Just look at the numbers. The poverty rate is estimated at over 45% in 2026. That is almost 4 times the national average. Let that sink in. While the rest of the country hovers around 11%, almost half of Tallulah is living in poverty. Their actual income per capita is $15,000. Compare that to the national average of $40,000 per individual. You cannot even feed yourself on $15,000 and have a roof over your head. It is like you have to choose one or the other. This is the type of town that makes you lose faith in the system. We are in one of the richest countries on the planet. And we have towns that look like this statistically and physically. Their violent crime rate is not terrible compared to the worst on this list, but that might just be because there is nothing left to steal. This is also what they call a food desert. They do not have a lot of grocery options. You are not living here. You are surviving here. Just like their economy is barely surviving. It is on life support and the plug is halfway pulled out. Number 2, Helena West, Helena, Arkansas. Yes, I find this place strange. It pops up on a lot of bad lists. Whenever things really start looking like they are going to suck, something from Arkansas fits the bill. In a lot of cases, it is Helena West, Helena. This is another one I felt a little guilty about showing homes for, but they have plenty that look abandoned. So why not face the reality? As a guy who follows statistics, seeing the numbers for this place makes me want to throw up. This is the United States, and it is this bad. They have a violent crime rate that is 365% above the national average. Read that again. 365%. That is nearly 4 times the danger of an average American town. That is not a crime wave. That is a war zone. Currently, around 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. That is triple the US average of 11.5%. Their unemployment is usually about double what the national average is. The income per capita is around $17,000. These numbers are spectacular in the worst way possible. Their schools are graded with an F. Their test scores are 52% lower than the US average. Their graduation rate is about 15% lower than the average. It is not a great place to live. It is not even a good place to visit. In 2026, local forums are filled with residents saying they do not feel safe anywhere in town. Violence has become the norm. When you call for help, you cannot be sure it will come in time. This is the collapse of the most basic social contract. The contract that says if you pay taxes, you get safety. Here, you pay taxes and you get fear. Buying a house here for cheap is like buying a ticket on a sinking ship. It does not matter how nice the cabin is if the boat is going down. Number 1. Cairo, Illinois. And number 1 is Cairo, Illinois. Cairo does not feel poor. It feels post-occupancy. The entire town looks like an old motel that shut down 20 years ago and nobody has been back since. This was once a really nice town. It sits at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. They had a lot of river traffic back in the day. Well, as that industry faded, they really did not have much else. It is sort of out there by itself in this weird world of farmland and rivers. The weird thing is you are only like 5 minutes from 4 different states. Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky are all right there. This was a strategic river city that should have thrived, but it was hollowed out by racism, disinvestment, infrastructure failures, and political paralysis. When people left, systems followed. Levees failed. Businesses closed. Schools emptied out. Oh, entire neighborhoods vanished into the grass. Cairo had a long history of racism going back to the 1930s. That is when the decline started. The last census where they gained population was 1940. By the 1960s, race issues came to a head. From that point on, the place started clearing out. In 1940, they had over 14,000 residents. Currently, it is less than 1,200. That is a population loss of over 90%. You get the feeling the only people still there are the people who cannot afford to leave. Their poverty rate is 36%. That is more than 3 times the national average. The average person makes less than $20,000 a year. The median home price here is $29,000. Yes, under $30,000 you could have a home. On Zillow, you can find them for $16,500. But remember the renovation trap. You buy it for $20,000. You put $50,000 into it, and it is still worth $20,000. You just lit $50,000 on fire. They haven't had a full-service grocery store in years. They have a large section that is completely abandoned. Basically, Cairo feels like a place the country quietly moved on from without saying goodbye. Standing here, you realize that a city is like a living thing. It can be killed. And right now, you are looking at the corpse. Every country has its postcards, and every country has its trash cans. But what we just saw are not trash cans. They are warnings. These towns did not die overnight. They died from 1,000 slow cuts that we usually ignore. Aging infrastructure, a one-dimensional economy, and the indifference of the system. $16,000 for a house sounds like the dream of a lifetime, but if that house is in a place without a doctor, without a police officer, and without a future, then that price is still too high. Do not let the numbers on a screen fool you. Do not buy a house just because it is cheap. Buy a community. Buy safety. Because when everything falls apart, the resale value of your house will not save you. Only your neighbors and the system around you can do that. This is a list of places you should not go. But more importantly, it is a lesson to look at where you live right now. Is your town starting to show these cracks? Because once the cracks start, they spread fast. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and choose wisely.